quick intro before we begin here. This episode is going to be very, very heavy on sources. We're going to be quoting from a lot of interviews, a lot of articles, a lot of books. That's very hard to convey a lot of this information graphically in a video in a way that is visually interesting, but we will try to source a lot of it. Also, if you are more interested in checking out those sources, there will be a written companion article released on our website, on our Patreon to coincide with that. So if you're on the $5 tier, you will be able to read that there. If one believes Hayao Miyazaki, The Boy and the Heron will be his last film. Of course, this would be at least his third last film, behind Princess Mononoke and The Wind Rises, and probably some other ones that I'm missing along the way. There's some suggestion that this retirement won't stick either. According to Studio Ghibli executive Juniyoshi Nishioka, Miyazaki's already batting around ideas for another movie. As Ghibli co-founder Toshio Suzuki put it, he's 82 years old. I think he will continue until he's 90 years old. Still, whatever Miyazaki's intentions, there is a sense that time is finite. Careers can be ended by forces greater than retirement. Animator Takeshi Honda recalls being approached by Miyazaki to work on The Boy and the Heron, which involved poaching Honda from the rebuild of Evangelion. "I don't have any more time," Miyazaki told Honda. "Nobody in the Miyazaki family has lived beyond 80. This is probably going to be my last film, so you have to come on board." Age is catching up with Miyazaki, one of the greatest living filmmakers. His eyesight is fading, and his hands are not as dexterous as they once were. His productivity has slowed. According to Suzuki, in his prime, Miyazaki would oversee 7 to 10 minutes of animation every month. On The Boy and the Heron, this rate fell to 1 minute of footage per month. Studio Ghibli had planned to release The Boy and the Heron in 2020 to coincide with the aborted Tokyo Olympic Games. Spoiler alert from January 2024, that did not quite happen. Miyazaki is a famously exacting animation director. He's known to work late, and working for him can be extremely stressful. He's also known for his harsh corrections and for redrawing a lot of the animation that he assigns to others. For example, he redrew 80,000 of Princess Mononoke's 144,000 frames. As producer Hirokatsu Kihara explained, Miyazaki likes to put everything of himself and everything that he had into one film. But when you've done that, what's left? The Boy and the Heron is a profoundly personal work for Miyazaki. A pamphlet accompanying the film's release in Japanese theaters described it as an autobiographical fantasy. And look, I think it speaks to the universal human experience of being menaced by a very large bird. However, as the production went on, there's a sense that Miyazaki loosened his grip. During the pandemic, animators worked from home, outside the studio itself. According to animator Toshiyuki Inui, Miyazaki also, quote, wasn't as strict as before. He would approve drawings that wouldn't have passed before just because he didn't have the strength to correct them. The character of Natsuko in particular is much more of a Honda design than a Miyazaki design. You can tell because she doesn't have huge honkers. Now, you might think that that seems like a cheap shot at one of the greatest living filmmakers, but rest assured, we have done our homework. The Backdrop presents, for your viewing pleasure, a dramatic reading from Starting Point, Hayao Miyazaki's memoir.
Nausicaa the girl is so attractive.
Nausicaa's breasts are rather large, aren't they?
Yes.
That's not so she'll be able to breastfeed her babies in the future or make love to a man who will steal her heart away. I think her bosom has to be large, so she can embrace all those poor old men and women in the castle when they're dying.
Oh, I get it.
Her bosom has to allow people to feel secure. She embraces them as they are dying.
I understand.
To be clear, this isn't to suggest that The Boy and the Heron is not a Miyazaki film. Just that it evolved to become a lot more cooperative and collaborative than Miyazaki's films have historically tended to be. As a critic, I've always looked up to Roger Ebert. When it comes to the power of media in general, I think about how Ebert argued for cinema as an empathy machine.
And the purpose of civilization and growth is to be able to reach out and empathize a little bit with other people. Find out what makes them tick, what they feel about, what they care about.
To go to a movie is to sit in the dark for 2 hours, to stare at a screen, and to see the world through somebody else's eyes. It can create an understanding that extends beyond mere words into something more profound.
I am declaring war on anybody who sells drugs in our community.
But Black Dynamite, I sell drugs to the community.
There is a lot of Miyazaki in Mahito, the protagonist of The Boy and the Heron. The movie opens with the firebombing of Tokyo, recalling Miyazaki's earliest memories of childhood. Like Miyazaki, Mahito grows up in relative privilege. Not only do his family own a car, they also have enough petrol to run it, something that Miyazaki talks about again in his memoir Starting Point. Miyazaki's father ran Miyazaki Airplane, which made tail fins for the Mitsubishi A6M0. In The Boy and the Heron, Mahito's father also designs parts for Japanese fighter jets. It was funny because you can tell instantly the character Shoichi is his own father, explains Honda. And he would only show us actual photographs of his father after we had done a little bit of work. So I was like, you could have shown this to us earlier. But it was very revelatory to discover what kind of person his father was by showing us that storyboard. Miyazaki's mother was diagnosed with spinal trabeculosis when he was a child, spending years bedridden and in hospitals. This seems likely to have informed Miyazaki's later work, such as My Neighbor Totoro. Miyazaki's mother would recover, but she eventually passed away while her workaholic son was animating Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which is retroactively considered the first Ghibli film. Throughout The Boy and the Heron, Mahito is processing the loss of his own mother. Mahito leaves Tokyo with his father and journeys into the countryside. He struggles to fit in, to accept his mother's death, and his father's marriage to her younger sister Natsuko. Investigating the property, he finds a strange tower. When his stepmother disappears, prompted by a mysterious and sinister heron, Mahito ventures into the tower. He discovers a strange world, overseen by a mysterious figure who may be his great-uncle. A man who, quote, read too many books and disappeared. This maps neatly to the founders of Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki, Toshio Suzuki, and Isao Takahata. Miyazaki is Mahito, Takahata is the great-uncle, and the grey heron is me, Suzuki recalls Miyazaki explaining. So I asked him why. He said Takahata discovered his talent and added him to the staff. I think Takahata-san was the one who helped him develop his ability. On the other hand, the relationship between the boy and the heron is a relationship where they don't give in to each other, push and pull. And while we tend to talk about Miyazaki as the guiding creative light of Studio Ghibli, it is worth acknowledging Takahata's influence. Takahata is responsible for Grave of the Fireflies, one of the most moving pieces of animation ever made. And the influence of Grave of the Fireflies is very obvious on the opening scenes of The Boy and the Heron, set in firebombed Tokyo. He was a big deal creatively, and he obviously meant a lot to Miyazaki. As such, the death of Takahata in 2018 changed the shape of the story. He was telling his own story at the beginning, and it was about the boy and the great-uncle, with the great-uncle character that was supposed to be the centerpiece, Suzuki explains. The character was based on Takahata. However, unfortunately, Takahata passed away during the making of the film, and that was very shocking for Miyazaki. For a long time, he wasn't able to continue working on the storyboard, so we decided to change the centerpiece of the story from the boy and the great-uncle to the relationship between the boy and the heron. As a result, the granduncle is largely missing from the first stretch of the film, only really becoming a key figure towards the climax, when it is revealed that he's been keeping this precarious imaginary world alive by stacking blocks in a demented game of Jenga. Realizing that his time is coming to an end, he wants Mahito to take his place. Steven Spielberg is one of my favorite directors, and there's a moment that I think about a lot. It's Spielberg being interviewed by James Lipton discussing Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Spielberg's films have always been informed by his parents' divorce. His mother was a musician, his father designed computers. This theme of familiar separation is woven into Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a story about a father abandoning his family to pursue something more abstract. However, Lipton focuses on the climax of the movie, in which mankind finally figures out how to communicate with the aliens. And he explains it beautifully and elegantly.
They make music on their computers and they are able to speak to each other.
That's an incredible moment. Spielberg finally seems to realize what the movie that he made, the movie that he poured months, if not years, of his life into making, is actually about. It's beautiful. That moment is a perfect encapsulation of the relationship between an artist and artistic expression. Watching The Boy and the Heron, which is a story about a decaying kingdom held together by a dying old man who has spent decades away from his family stacking blocks, it's hard not to ask, what happens to Studio Ghibli after Miyazaki dies? It's an important question given the studio's legacy and its influence. Miyazaki doesn't really seem that bothered. The future is clear, he stated in the documentary The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness. It's all going to fall apart. I can already see it. What's the use in worrying? It's inevitable. Ghibli is just a random name that I got from an airplane. It's just a name. Of course, in the interest of fairness, we should acknowledge that not everybody who works at Studio Ghibli shares this sentiment. In the wake of Miyazaki's last retirement, for example, Suzuki had to talk to the press to assure them that it, quote, would be possible for Ghibli to keep making films indefinitely. However, the evidence doesn't really bear that out. The company has struggled to find a successor to Takahata and Miyazaki. Miyazaki's son Goro has stepped forward as a candidate, but his work leaves a little to be desired. Attending a screening of Goro's first movie, Tales of Earthsea, Miyazaki made like a Spielberg dad and left about an hour in for a cigarette break, stating, "It felt like I'd been in there 3 hours." It's a pretty universal feeling that every parent who's ever sat through a school play can empathize with. Offering his opinion on the movie, Hayao stated, "I saw my own child. He hasn't become an adult. That's all. It's good that he made one movie. With that, he should stop making movies." And look, my mom has not read any of the books I've published, but at least when people ask about them, she replies, "Yeah, but I'm sure they're pretty good." Ghibli was recently sold to Nippon TV, with the Succession issue explicitly cited as a key factor. The studio's future seems far from secure. As you can hopefully tell from the video so far, I like context. I like to understand things and how they fit together. I also love David Lynch, one of the most confounding of mainstream directors, whose films and shows often reject a simple or straightforward explanation. I can tell you what I think happened in a David Lynch movie, but I don't know I can tell you what actually happened in a David Lynch movie, and I don't know that anyone else can either. And I love this, because it forces me to engage with a work on a purely emotional level, rather than puzzling it or solving it or intellectualizing it. I also love it because it says something about the artist. Lynch's movies and shows are all saying something, even if I occasionally struggle to put into words what that something is. And I don't think Lynch can put that meaning into words either, because if he could, he wouldn't have to make the movies.
And in the 60s, I think it might have been called a bad trip. Sometimes people want to go on one. It just makes them feel kind of creepy, and that's maybe what they're looking for.
The Boy and the Heron operates according to a dream logic. I don't think it's possible to understand all of it, Inui stated. Miyazaki himself said he doesn't understand it, so it's not made to be understood. And yet, even if The Boy and the Heron defies explanation, watching it does feel like coming closer to understanding Miyazaki himself. His son Goro has talked about his difficult relationship to a largely absent and workaholic father. When I was in junior high and high school, when I started to become more conscious of my father in terms of, I'd like to know more about my own father, or I wonder what my father is thinking, he was never around. The more wonderful I thought my father's movies were, the more I watched them because I wanted to learn about him through them. This is a two-way street. Miyazaki makes movies to express himself. Suzuki talks about the film as a message from the animator to his own descendants. Miyazaki's making the new film for his grandson. It's his way of saying, Grandpa's moving on to the next world, but he's leaving behind this film. The Boy and the Heron is a movie made by a man who's devoted his life to building imaginary worlds, a man who read books and disappeared, about a child refusing to repeat that mistake. At the end of The Boy and the Heron, Mahito chooses reality instead of this fantasy life. The movie's closing scene even finds him returning to Tokyo. Maybe this isn't just a message to Miyazaki's own children and grandchildren. Profiling the director in the wake of Howl's Moving Castle, journalist Margaret Talbot noted that Miyazaki, quote, hates the idea that children watch his films repeatedly. He's very worried about kids consuming too much media, and thinks that they should watch a movie like Totoro no more than once a year. The artist is a big critic of our dependency on virtual reality, computer games, TV, and animation too. Suzuki suggests that this is still the case, explaining, Hayao Miyazaki and I are both very opposed to children watching Totoro over and over. You only have to see it once. The Boy and the Heron feels like an old man reflecting on the life that he's lived, and the worlds that he's built, hoping that visitors can glean some knowledge and appreciation from them without becoming trapped within them. Mahito forgets the fantasy world as he leaves, the heron telling him that forgetting is natural. The Japanese title of The Boy and the Heron is How Do You Live Now?, named for a book Mahito reads in the film. It's a movie about how life continues, and there is some comfort in that. I wanted to convey the message to children that this life is worth living, Miyazaki stated. That's the thing about dreams and movies. Even if we forget the particulars, we carry them with us out into the world. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.